Everyone sins. It's a fact of life. Sin apparently exists when we do something wrong. Defined in the Bible, as anything contrary to the will of God. But sin is not always abhorrent to God. Sometimes it's about His glory. Sin is in the eye of the beholder. It can be small and subtle, but a sin, no doubt, is still a sin. In his 1926 book, The Funeral Customs of All Nations, Bertram S. Puckle equated the consumption of sin with tribal traditions of slaughter, and noted its continued use in some parts of Africa and Australia. Puckle also cites a passage from the Bible that he believes is the source of this practice. The sin-eating custom found throughout the British Isles and continental Europe was probably inherited from pagan times, and survived until about 100 years ago. The premise of the ritual was that the moral imperfections of the deceased could be absorbed by another person, guaranteeing that the soul would be absolved of all sin. The origin of this practice is somewhat obscure. Some say it can be traced back to ancient Egyptian death rituals. Perhaps it comes from the Jewish tradition of releasing goats into the wild on Yom Kippur. What all these different cultures share is that the beast is seen as the personification of sin, and sending it to die in the desert meant that all the crimes committed against God would die with it. It became those who bear the guilt of others. The scapegoat. A more recent theory is represented by British historian Dr. Ruth Richardson. She believes that sin-eating may have grown from the custom of nobles giving food to the poor at family funerals. In exchange for this truly meager portion of food, the lowly herds were instructed to consume the bread and wine, and then pray for the deceased's well-being. A lesser-known but more notable legend is one from mysterious, wild tribes, known to slaughter animals on their graves, believing that they will in fact take upon themselves the sins of the dead. In the same way, it was in the realm of the human scapegoat to take on the task, even if for only the sake of a small fee and an even smaller meal, for usurping the moral failures of their customers. And whatever the consequences were in the afterlife, let them come. It's surprising enough that such a creature could have been unearthed from a distant pagan period of history. But finding reliable evidence of its existence in the British Isles 100 years ago is certainly far more astonishing. Around 1825, Professor Evans of Presbyterian College said he knew of a sin-eater living near Cardiganshire. Hated as impure by superstitious villagers, the sin-eater completely cut himself off from all social interactions with his fellow creatures. An outcast always living alone, in a secluded place. And people who happened to meet him, avoided him like they would avoid lepers or the plague. This unfortunate soul was considered a companion to evil spirits, and addicted to sorcery, spells, and unholy practices. Only when death occurred did they seek him out, and when his purpose was accomplished, they burned the wooden bowls and plates from which he ate, after he was made to eat the food that was given to him, from its position, sitting directly on top of the corpse. Eating sin, according to an old Hereford custom, involved carrying the deceased out of the house on a stretcher, placing a loaf of bread directly on the corpse, and then setting a huge maple bowl filled with beer next to the bread. Once they were consumed, the sin-eater received a fee of 6pence, in return for bearing the deceased's sins upon himself. Suggestions have been made of a connection between the Old Testament sin-eater and the Jewish scapegoat. Given the relationship between the funeral feast and death, there is one aspect of the problem that is closely related to the idea of the transmission of good and bad personalities through the consumption of certain foods. And in an extraordinarily taboo version of events, actually participating in the eating of parts from the human body, associated with vitality. Traces of this vile cult still exist, but its origins are deeply rooted in antiquity. It's not exactly what is meant by cannibalism, in the sense that is commonly used to imply the eating of human flesh for dietary purposes. These violent orgies were accompanied by demonic dances to express joy, often called war dances. These ceremonies were often used as a sign of victory over fallen enemies. Believed to be remnants of religious ceremonies from around the world, and originally made to honor the human sacrifice. Cannibalism seems to have been initiated by Cronus, a Greek god, worshipped by the pre-Hellenistic population of Greece, and also identified as the Roman god Saturn. Cronus is the father of the Olympians. He destroyed his father Uranus, and he feared that his children would do the same, and so in an attempt to prevent this, he ate his children, one by one. The consumption of human flesh is part of the religious rituals of many Hamitic peoples in Africa. Totemism and animism are vast and complicated cults. In short, they were associated with early mysticism, surrounded by all sorts of magical rituals that appeared to be sanctioned by the Church, but in practice were strictly forbidden by biblical command. Underlying all these practices, however, was the idea that, for example, by eating the heart of a lion, the animal's fierce courage was absorbed into the nature of the participant. From this, many of the Native American tribal symbols, such as the running bull and eagle heart, arose. According to Irish and Welsh legends, it is forbidden for men to eat the animal from which the tribe is named. It is considered a taboo. It was originally only eaten ceremonially, and even then, the name of the animal was seldom pronounced. And when it was uttered with a special respect. That concludes today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you wanted to, you could like, share, and subscribe to this channel, just a thought. Oh, and by the way, there's even a Patreon, just in case anyone feels a little crazy. Thank you, and goodbye.